The galaxy had known peace for 40,000 years. 12 ancient species had joined together to form what they called the Galactic Concord. They shared knowledge, traded goods, and protected each other from any threat that dared to rise against them. Their combined fleets numbered in the millions. Their technology could move stars and build worlds from nothing. They believed they were untouchable. Humanity had joined this great alliance only 300 years ago. To the elder species, humans were like children who had just learned to walk. The Sylvari, with their crystal ships and minds that could calculate the movement of galaxies, often smiled at human scientists who struggled with problems they had solved 10,000 years before. The Mordock, massive beings of living metal who had built weapons the size of moons, found human warships amusing in their simplicity. The Ithrael, whose psychic powers could touch minds across light years, pitied humans for being so alone in their own heads. But the Concord allowed humanity to join anyway. Humans were curious, eager, and surprisingly brave. They would make good servants, the elder species thought. Good workers. Perhaps, in another 10,000 years, they might even become useful. Commander Jake Donnelly had heard these whispers his entire career. He had served on joint missions where alien officers spoke about humans as if they were not in the room. He had watched his fellow officers work twice as hard to earn half the respect, but Jake did not let it make him bitter. He simply did his job, and did it well. Jake commanded the human frigate Steadfast, a small ship assigned to the rear guard of the greatest fleet ever assembled. 6 million warships from all 12 species had gathered at the edge of the Orion Arm. They had come to face something new. Something that had emerged from the empty void between galaxies. The Vethkai. No one knew what they truly were. They appeared as living darkness. A spreading shadow that blocked out the stars wherever it touched. Scout ships that flew too close simply vanished. Probes sent into the mass returned no data at all. It was as if the Vethkai were made of nothing, and yet that nothing was hungry. Admiral Kethoran of the Sylvari commanded the combined fleet. He was over 6,000 years old, and he had never lost a battle. His crystal flagship, the Eternal Light, hung at the center of the formation like a gleaming jewel. Around it, ships of every shape and size formed a wall of metal and energy that stretched across 3 light years. Jake watched from the bridge of the Steadfast as the Vethkai approached. On the main screen, it looked like a wave of ink spilling across the stars. Where it passed, suns went dark. Not destroyed, just dark, as if something had reached inside them and stolen their fire. The Admiral gave the order to fire. 6 million ships unleashed their weapons at once. Energy beams that could crack planets in half. Missiles that carried the power of dying stars. Gravity weapons that could tear holes in the fabric of space itself. The combined firepower of the Galactic Concord lit up the void like a second Big Bang. The darkness did not stop. Jake felt his stomach drop as the Vethkai simply absorbed everything the fleet threw at it. The weapons did not bounce off. They did not explode against some shield. They just vanished into the black, swallowed whole, as if they had never existed at all. Then the Vethkai reached the first line of ships. Jake watched in horror as the great Mordock dreadnoughts, each one the size of a small moon, went dark. One moment they were firing with everything they had. The next, they were cold and silent, drifting like dead whales in an ocean of nothing. The crews inside did not even have time to scream. The Sylvari tried to retreat, their crystal ships spinning away at speeds that should have been impossible. But the darkness was faster. It stretched out tendrils of shadow that caught them mid-flight and pulled them back. The beautiful ships crumbled into dust. Their crews dissolved into the hungry void. The battle lasted 17 minutes. Jake could not move. He could not speak. He could only watch as the greatest military force ever assembled was eaten alive. The Eternal Light, Admiral Kethoran's flagship, held out longer than most. Its crystal hull blazed with desperate light as its crew fought to survive. But even that light faded, dimmed, and finally went out. 6 million ships, trillions of lives, gone. The Vethkai did not pause to celebrate. It did not slow down. It simply continued forward, spreading across the stars like a disease with no cure. Jake finally found his voice. "Get us out of here." he said to his pilot. His words were quiet, almost a whisper. Get us out of here now. The Steadfast turned and ran. They were too small to matter, too far back to be noticed. The darkness had bigger prey to chase. As they fled toward Earth, Jake looked back at the battlefield one last time. Where there had once been stars, there was now only black. Where there had once been hope, there was only fear. He thought about the alien officers who had looked down on humanity for so long. He thought about their ancient wisdom and their powerful technology. He thought about how sure they had been that nothing could threaten them. They had been wrong. In the months that followed, the Vethkai spread across the galaxy like wildfire. System after system fell silent. The great homeworlds of the elder species, protected by defenses that had stood for millennia, crumbled one by one. The Silvari were the first to fall completely. Then, the Mordok. Then, the Ithrael. Refugees poured toward the edges of known space, toward the few places the darkness had not yet reached. Many of them came to Earth. The same aliens who had once smiled at human simplicity now begged for shelter among the very people they had dismissed, and humanity took them in. Not because they had forgotten how they had been treated, not because they were foolish or naive, but because that was what humans did. When someone was in trouble, you helped them. When someone was scared, you gave them hope, even if you had none left for yourself. Jake Donnelly stood on the observation deck of a space station orbiting Earth and watched another star go dark in the distance. The night sky that humanity had gazed at for thousands of years was dying, one light at a time. But Jake did not look away. He could not afford to. Someone had to watch. Someone had to remember. And someone had to figure out how to fight back. Because giving up was not something humans knew how to do. 6 months had passed since the Great Fleet fell. In that time, the galaxy had become a graveyard. Captain Mia Hartley stood before the United Earth Council in a room filled with the most powerful leaders humanity had ever produced. Presidents, generals, scientists, and diplomats sat in rows of curved seats, their faces pale under the cold lights. Behind Mia, a massive screen showed a map of the galaxy. Half of it was colored in black. 3 days ago, Mia said, her voice steady even as her heart raced, we received the last transmission from the Corveth homeworld. She pressed a button, and a voice filled the room. It was old and tired, speaking in a language that the translation systems turned into English. We were wrong about humans, the voice said. We thought you were children. We thought you were weak. We were fools. Tell them we are sorry we will not see what they become. The transmission ended with a burst of static. Then, silence. Mia looked at the council members. Some of them were crying. Others stared at nothing, their minds struggling to accept what was happening. The Corveth had been the oldest species in the galaxy. They had watched stars being born. They had guided younger races through their first steps into space, and now they were gone, swallowed by the same darkness that was coming for everyone else. Earth is all that remains, Mia said. Us and the refugees we have taken in, billions of beings from a dozen worlds. With nowhere else to go, a general in the front row spoke up. How long do we have? Mia hesitated. She did not want to say the number out loud. But they deserved to know. At current speed, the Vethkai will reach our solar system in approximately 14 months. The room erupted. People shouted questions, demanded answers, called for plans that did not exist. Mia let them talk. She understood their fear. She felt it too. Every time she closed her eyes and saw those stars going dark, when the noise finally died down, an old woman in the back row stood up. Dr. Helen Park had helped design humanity's first faster-than-light engine. She was 93 years old and had seen more of space than almost anyone alive. The question is not how long we have, Dr. Park said. The question is, what we do with that time. Mia nodded. I agree. Which is why I am here today. Not to deliver bad news, but to ask for something. What do you need? The council president asked. Everything, Mia said. Every ship, every scientist, every resource we have. The elder species tried to fight the Vethkai with weapons that had worked for 40,000 years. They failed because they could not imagine anything different. But humanity is different. We are young, we are desperate, and we have nothing to lose. She looked around the room, meeting eyes with as many people as she could. I am not going to stand here and promise you victory. I do not know if we can win. But I know that we have to try, because the alternative is to sit here and wait for the darkness to come. And that is not who we are. The council voted unanimously to give Mia whatever she needed. In the weeks that followed, Earth transformed. Factories that had been building consumer goods switched to producing ship parts. Universities emptied as students and professors joined research teams working on secret projects. Millions of people volunteered for military service, knowing they might never come back, and the refugees watched in amazement. An Ithriel elder named Sovan had not spoken since his world died. He had lost his entire family, his students, everything he had built over 3,000 years of life. He spent his days sitting in a refugee camp on the outskirts of New York City, staring at nothing. One morning, a human child wandered into the camp. She was maybe 7 years old, with messy brown hair and dirt on her face. She walked right up to Sovan and sat down next to him. "Why are you sad?" she asked. Sovan did not answer. He did not even look at her. "My mom says the bad thing is coming," the girl continued. "She says it ate the stars. But my dad says we are going to fight it. He says humans never give up." Sovan finally turned to look at her. In all his centuries of life, he had never understood humans. They lived such short lives, like candles that burned bright and then went out. What was the point of fighting when you knew you were going to lose? "Your father is brave," Sovan said at last. His voice was rough from disuse. "But bravery alone cannot defeat the Vethkai." The girl shrugged. "Maybe not. But my dad says that is not why you fight. You fight because it is the right thing to do, even if you lose." She stood up and ran off to play with the other children. Sovan watched her go, something stirring in his chest that he had not felt in a long time. That night, he left the refugee camp and walked to the nearest military base. He told the guards that he wanted to help. He had knowledge, he said. Old knowledge from his people. That might be useful. The guards did not laugh at him or turn him away. They simply nodded and brought him inside. He was not the only one. Across the planet, alien refugees who had spent months lost in despair began to wake up. They saw humans working day and night, pushing themselves beyond exhaustion, refusing to accept the fate that had claimed every other species. And they remembered something they had forgotten in their long existence. Hope was not about knowing you would win. Hope was about choosing to fight anyway. On a space station orbiting Mars, Mia Hartley met with her crew for the first time. Lieutenant Ben Gallagher had lost his entire family when a Vethkai tendril reached their colony. He had every reason to be broken. But instead he was angry. Angry in a way that made him dangerous. Dr. Claire Vance had spent her career studying alien life forms. Now, she was studying the Vethkai, trying to understand the thing that had destroyed everything she loved. Her eyes were tired, but focused. Chief Engineer Sam Okoro had not slept more than 3 hours a night in weeks. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the ships going dark. So he stayed awake and kept working. "We are not soldiers," Mia told them. "We are not heroes. We are just people trying to do the impossible. But that is what humanity has always done. We walked when they said we could not. We flew when they said we would fall. We reached the stars when they said they were too far. W. 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 She looked at each of them in turn. The darkness is coming. And when it gets here, it is going to find out that the smallest light can burn the brightest. Outside the window, the sun shone steady and warm. For now, deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, in tunnels that had been carved out of solid stone generations ago, humanity's last hope was taking shape. Dr. Nate Crawford stood in front of a machine that looked like it had been built by a madman. Wires ran in every direction. Panels blinked with lights that no one fully understood. At its center sat a sphere of pure energy, spinning slowly, giving off a soft, golden glow that made everyone in the room squint. "This is insane," said a Silvari scientist named Tethora. She had been one of the greatest minds of her people before the darkness took her world. Now she stood in a human laboratory, helping to build something her old teachers would have called impossible. The energy requirements alone would drain a star. Nate smiled. He had heard that word many times in his life. Impossible. His professors had called him impossible when he presented theories that went against everything they believed. His colleagues had called him impossible when he refused to give up on ideas that everyone else had abandoned. And now, with the fate of the galaxy hanging in the balance, he was building something that was, by all known laws of physics, completely and utterly impossible. "That is the point," Nate said. "The Vethkai eat energy. They eat light. They eat everything that makes the universe alive. So we are going to give them something they cannot eat. Something that eats them instead." He pointed to the glowing sphere. "We call it Project Beacon. It generates a new kind of light. A frequency that the Vethkai cannot absorb. A frequency that hurts them." Tethora stared at the sphere with wide eyes. "How did you discover this frequency?" "By accident," Nate admitted. "One of our early tests went wrong. The containment field collapsed, and the energy burst outward. It did not hurt any of us, but a sample of Vethkai matter we had collected started to burn." "You have a sample of the Vethkai?" "A small piece, recovered from one of the battles. Most of it dissolved before we could study it. But that one burst of energy made it scream." Nate's smile faded. "Until that moment, we did not even know it could scream." Work on Project Beacon continued around the clock. Scientists from a dozen species crowded into the underground facility, sharing knowledge that their ancestors had kept secret for millennia. The old walls between them did not matter anymore. There was only the work. Meanwhile, Commander Jake Donnelly was building something else entirely. In a shipyard orbiting Earth's moon, thousands of workers swarmed over the skeleton of a massive vessel. The Defiance, they called it. It was not beautiful like the crystal ships of the Silvari. It was not powerful like the war machines of the Mordok. It was ugly, blocky, and covered with welding scars, but it was built to do one thing: survive. Jake walked through the half-finished corridors, checking on progress, answering questions, solving problems. He had not been home in 3 months. He had not slept more than 4 hours at a time and even longer. But every time he felt tired, he remembered those stars going dark, and he kept working. A young pilot fell into step beside him. Her name was Zoe Mitchell, and she had the kind of eyes that had seen too much, too young. When she was 16, her colony had been one of the first to fall to the Vethkai. She had watched from an escape pod as everyone she knew vanished into the darkness. "Commander," she said, "I want to volunteer for the strike team." Jake stopped walking. "The strike team is a suicide mission. You know that." "Yes, sir. The ships we are building have experimental drives. 30% chance of explosion just from turning them on." "Yes, sir." Jake studied her face. He saw no fear there. No hesitation. Just a cold, steady determination that reminded him of himself. "Why?" he asked. "Because I have been running since I was 16 years old," Zoe said. "I am tired of running. I want to fight back. I want to make them pay for what they took from me." Jake nodded slowly. "Report to Training Base 7 tomorrow morning." "And Zoe? Try to get some sleep. You are going to need it." As the weeks passed, the fleet took shape. Hundreds of ships, each one crewed by volunteers who knew they might not come back. Humans made up most of the crews, but aliens served alongside them. A Mordok engineer who had lost everything worked in the engine room of the Defiance. An Ithrael psychic helped coordinate communications between ships. A Corveth historian recorded everything, determined that someone would remember this moment even if they failed. In the refugee camps, something strange began to happen. The alien survivors, who had spent months in despair, started to change. They watched the humans around them working, fighting, refusing to give up. And slowly, they began to remember what it felt like to have hope. Sovan, the Ithrael elder who had not spoken for so long, started teaching again. He gathered the children of the camp around him, human and alien alike, and told them stories of his people, their history, their music, their dreams. Not if, when. One night, Captain Mia Hartley visited the underground facility to check on Project Beacon. She found Nate Crawford asleep at his desk, surrounded by papers covered in equations she could not understand. Dr. Vance was there too, studying data on a screen that showed the structure of the Vethkai in ways no one had ever seen before. "Will it work?" Mia asked. Vance did not look away from her screen. "I do not know. The theory is sound, but we have never tested it at full scale. We will not know until we try. And if it does not work?" Vance finally turned to face her. Her eyes were red from lack of sleep, but there was something fierce in them. "Then we will have gone down fighting. And that has to count for something." Mia walked to the window that looked out over the main laboratory. Below, humans and aliens worked side by side, building a weapon that might save the galaxy, or might destroy them all. They worked not because they were sure of victory, but because they refused to accept defeat. That was the human way, Mia thought. You did not give up just because the odds were against you. You did not stop fighting just because you might lose. You kept going, kept pushing, kept hoping, until there was nothing left. And sometimes, against all logic and reason, you won. Outside, the stars continued to go dark. But inside, a new light was growing. The darkness had reached the solar system. Jupiter was the first to fall. Mia watched from the bridge of the Defiance as the giant planet's storms went still and its famous red spot faded to gray. The Vethkai wrapped around it like a black blanket, draining its heat, its light, its very existence. Within hours, the largest planet in the solar system was nothing but a cold, dead rock. Saturn followed. Then Uranus. Then Neptune. One by one, the outer planets went dark. "Time to intercept?" Mia asked. 6 hours, Ben Gallagher replied from his station. "Maybe less. They are moving faster now, like they are hungry." Mia gripped the arms of her command chair. Around her, the bridge crew worked in tense silence. They had trained for this moment for months. They had run simulations until they could do their jobs in their sleep, but nothing could truly prepare you for facing the end of everything. The Defiance hung at the center of humanity's fleet. 300 ships, a number that would have seemed laughable against the Vethkai's endless mass. But these were not ordinary ships. Each one carried a piece of Project Beacon's technology, a weapon designed to hurt something that had never been hurt before. Behind the fleet, Mars glowed red and warm. Behind that, Earth spun blue and green, home to billions of lives depending on them to succeed. There would be no retreat. There would be no second chance. This was it. Mia opened a channel to all ships. "This is Captain Hartley of the Defiance. In a few hours, we are going to face something that has destroyed half the galaxy, something that has eaten 10,000 civilizations and never been stopped." She paused, looking at the faces around her. Ben, steady as always, his anger focused into cold determination. Dr. Vance, watching her screens, ready to guide the beacon to its target. Sam Okoro, who had somehow kept the experimental systems running through sheer willpower, and dozens of others, human and alien alike, all ready to give everything they had. "I am not going to lie to you," Mia continued. "Many of us will not survive this day. But I want you to remember something. We are not fighting for ourselves. We are fighting for everyone who came before us. Everyone who believed that life was worth protecting. We are fighting for the future that the Vethkai want to take away." She took a deep breath. "Today, we remind the universe that light does not go quietly. Today, we show them what humanity means. All ships, prepare for combat." The fleet moved forward, The Vethkai stretched across the void like a wall of midnight, so vast that it seemed to fill the entire sky. As the ships approached, Mia could see shapes moving within the darkness. Tendrils reaching out, shadows shifting. It was alive in a way that nothing else was alive. A hunger-given form. "Launch fighters," Mia ordered. 200 small craft screamed out of the carrier bays, their engines blazing against the black. Zoe Mitchell led the first wing, her hands steady on the controls, her mind clear and focused. She had waited years for this moment. Years of training, years of anger, years of dreaming about the day she could finally fight back. "All wings, follow me," she said. "We need to punch a hole through their outer layer. Keep your lights hot and your drives ready to blow. This is a one-way trip." The fighters hit the Vethkai like bullets hitting water. The darkness parted around them, then rushed back, trying to swallow them whole. Zoe's wing fired their weapons, miniature versions of Project Beacon's light, and the shadows burned. The Vethkai screamed. It was not a sound anyone heard with their ears. It was a feeling, a wave of agony that washed across the fleet and made everyone flinch. The darkness that had consumed half a galaxy was feeling pain for the first time in its existence. "It is working," Dr. Vance shouted. "The frequency is hurting them. Keep pushing." But the Vethkai fought back. Tendrils of shadow whipped out and grabbed fighter after fighter, crushing them like insects. Zoe watched her squadron shrink from 40 to 30 to 20. Good pilots, brave people, vanishing into the black one by one. "Hold the line," she screamed into her radio. "We need to give the Defiance time." Behind her, the main fleet engaged. Ships fired everything they had, beams of golden light cutting through the darkness. The Vethkai recoiled, twisted, lashed out in fury. A cruiser on Mia's left exploded as its experimental drive overloaded. Another ship went dark, its crew lost before they could even cry out. But they were hurting it. For the first time, something was hurting it. "We are almost in position," Ben reported. 2 minutes to the core." "We do not have 2 minutes," Mia replied. She looked at the tactical display. Zoe's wing was down to 7 fighters. The fleet had lost a third of its ships. The Vethkai was closing in around them like a fist. "Then we make time," Sam Okoro said from his engineering station. He was bleeding from a cut on his forehead, but his voice was calm. "I can overload the secondary reactors. Give us a burst of speed. That could tear the ship apart." "That is a problem for later." Sam started working his console. "Assuming there is a later." Mia made a decision. "Do it." The Defiance surged forward, its hull groaning under the strain. Around it, the surviving ships pushed harder, giving everything they had to keep the darkness at bay. Zoe's last 3 fighters formed a wedge in front of the carrier, their weapons blazing a path through the shadows. They reached the core. At the center of the Vethkai mass, there was something different. A concentration of darkness so deep that it seemed to pull at the light itself. This was the heart, the source, the thing that drove the hunger forward, and it was right in front of them. "Activate Project Beacon," Mia ordered. Deep in the belly of the Defiance, machines that had been built by desperate hands hummed to life. Energy built and built, contained by fields that could barely hold it. The golden sphere that Nate Crawford had created months ago began to spin faster and faster. "Beacon at 50%, Dr. Vance reported. 70. 90. Full power." Mia looked at the darkness surrounding them. She thought about Earth behind her, about all the people counting on this moment. She thought about the alien species who had once looked down on humanity, now standing beside them in this final fight. "Fire," she said. A new sun was born. Light exploded outward from the Defiance, golden and fierce, brighter than anything the universe had seen in a billion years. It washed over the Vethkai core, and the darkness screamed again, louder this time. A sound of pure agony that echoed across dimensions. The Vethkai began to burn. Zoe, floating in her crippled fighter, watched as the darkness that had taken everything from her caught fire. Tears streamed down her face, but she was smiling. They had done it, against all odds, against everything that said it was impossible. They had done it. The last thing Captain Mia Hartley saw before the light took her was the stars coming back. The light spread across the galaxy like a wave of golden fire. It started at the heart of the solar system, where the Defiance had made its final stand. From there, it raced outward at speeds that should have been impossible, carrying with it the frequency that Dr. Nate Crawford had discovered by accident in a laboratory under the Rocky Mountains. Wherever it touched the Veth Kai, the darkness burned. Wherever it reached a dead star, the fires began to glow again. Zoe Mitchell floated in her broken fighter and watched the miracle unfold. Her ship had no power left, no engines, no weapons. She had maybe an hour of air remaining. But she did not care, because the darkness that had haunted her dreams for years was dying around her, dissolving into nothing, returning the stolen light to a galaxy that had nearly lost everything. "This is Rescue Shuttle 7, a voice crackled through her radio. "We have your position. Hold on, pilot. We are coming to get you." "Take your time," Zoe said, her voice weak but steady. "I have got a pretty good view from here." Across the battlefield, other survivors were being pulled from the wreckage. Of the 300 ships that had charged into the darkness, less than 50 remained. Of the thousands of crew members who had volunteered for the mission, barely a quarter survived. But those who lived carried with them something precious, proof that the impossible could be done. Commander Jake Donnelly stood on the bridge of a rescue cruiser, coordinating the search for survivors. He had not been on the front lines during the battle. His job had been to stay behind, to keep the fleet organized, to make the hard choices about who went where and when. It was not glamorous work, but someone had to do it. Now he worked to save as many people as he could from the wreckage of humanity's greatest victory. "We found another life pod," one of his officers reported. "Mordock engineer, alive but badly hurt. Get him to medical," Jake said. "What about the Defiance?" The officer hesitated. "The ship is gone, sir. Completely vaporized when the beacon fired. There is nothing left." Jake closed his eyes. "Captain Mia Hartley, Dr. Claire Vance, Chief Engineer Sam Okoro, all the others who had crewed that ship, who had known they would not survive, who had pressed the button anyway. They had given everything so that everyone else could live." "Noted in the record," Jake said quietly. "The crew of the Defiance died as heroes. Make sure no one forgets that." The days that followed were a blur of activity. Search parties spread across the solar system, looking for survivors and assessing the damage. Earth celebrated with tears of joy and grief mixed together. The refugees who had huddled in camps for months came out into the sunlight, looking up at a sky that was slowly filling with stars again. And across the galaxy, the impossible continued to happen. Reports came in from distant systems, where the Veth Kai had held control for months. The darkness was fading everywhere. Not just dying, but unraveling, as if the frequency from Project Beacon was spreading through its entire being like a disease it could not fight. Stars that had been cold and dead began to warm again. Planets that had been frozen tombs started to thaw. Dr. Nate Crawford, working from the ruins of his underground laboratory, barely had time to sleep. He had teams transmitting the beacon frequency to every corner of known space, making sure the light reached everywhere the darkness had touched. It was exhausting work, but every time he felt tired, he remembered Mia Hartley's face when she gave the order to fire. And he kept going. 6 months after the battle, the surviving leaders of the Galactic Concord gathered on Earth. They came from the scattered remnants of 12 great civilizations, species that had once ruled the stars and had now been humbled by their own near extinction. They came not as rulers or advisors, but as guests, standing on the soil of a world they had once dismissed as primitive. The ceremony took place in a field outside New York City, under a sky that blazed with stars. Millions watched on screens around the planet and across the colonies. This was a moment that would be remembered for as long as memory lasted. A Corveth elder named Sevan stepped forward to speak. He was over 12,000 years old, one of the last of his kind. He had seen empires rise and fall. He had watched species evolve and go extinct, and now he stood before humanity, the youngest members of the Concord, the ones who had saved them all. "We called you children," Sevan said. his voice carrying across the silent crowd. "We called you primitive. We called you emotional, and reckless, and foolish. We forgot that those who are closest to the struggle for survival never forget how to fight for it." He looked around at the humans gathered before him. Men and women, young and old, all watching with quiet pride. "You taught us something we had forgotten in our long existence," Sivan continued. "You taught us that hope is not about knowing you will win. It is about choosing to fight anyway. About refusing to give up even when everything says you should." He knelt, slowly, and with great dignity, his ancient joints creaking in protest. Around him, the other alien leaders did the same. 12 species, kneeling before humanity. "We are in your debt," Seven said. "And we are honored to stand beside you, whatever comes next." Commander Jake Donnelly and Zoe Mitchell stood at the edge of the crowd, watching the ceremony. Both of them carried scars from the battle, physical and otherwise. Both of them had lost friends, loved ones, pieces of themselves that they would never get back. "What happens now?" Zoe asked. Jake looked up at the night sky. It was full of stars again, more stars than he had ever seen. Some of them were natural, burning bright as they had for billions of years. Others were new, artificial suns built by human hands, part of a network called the beacon stations that would spread light across the galaxy forever. "Now, we rebuild," Jake said. "We help the other species recover. We make sure everyone has a home, everyone has hope. And we prepare." "Prepare for what?" Jake smiled. But there was an edge to it. "The Vethkai came from somewhere. The void between galaxies is big. Maybe there are more of them out there. Maybe there is something else, something even worse. We do not know." He put a hand on Zoe's shoulder. "But if anything else comes for us, we will be ready. Because now the whole galaxy knows what humanity is capable of. They know that when the darkness comes, we are the ones who push back." Above them, the first of the new beacon stations came online, a ring of artificial suns stretching across the heavens. Their light shone down on Earth, on the survivors, on a galaxy that had been given a second chance. Humanity's light would never go out again. In the crowd, an old Ithriel named Sovan held the hand of the human child who had spoken to him in the refugee camp so long ago. She was older now, but her eyes were still bright with wonder. "You were right," Sovan said to her. "Your father was right. You fought because it was the right thing to do. And you won. You won." The girl smiled up at him. "That is what humans do." And around them, under a sky full of stars that humanity had saved, the future began.